好，我们现在开始讲今天晚上的课。今天晚上的课呢，就是一个慈悲心的修法。
So we're going to begin now with tonight's teaching, which is a guided session in compassion meditation.
首先，我们这个慈悲心的重要性，这个是非常非常重要。我们一定达成佛教的。所有的佛教徒一定要高度重视这个慈悲心的修法。
As for the importance of compassion, this is something that all students of the Mahayana tradition should really regard as very important.
那么我们可以这么讲我们的从无始以来到现在，我们在这个轮回当中生死轮回当中流转了这么长的时间。那么我们每一次离开这个世界的时候，我们一无所有的离开这个世界主要的原因是什么呢？就是因为我们没有菩提心，没有慈悲心这样子的原因。
So putting it simply, we can say that the reason that we have cycled in samsara since beginningless time, the reason that each time we exit one life or we leave this world, we do so with nothing, is because we haven't cultivated compassion or bodhicitta.
我们每一次无论是来到人间或者是其他的六道轮回当中的哪一个我们每一次来到这个世界的时候，来的时候就是零那个时候我们没有任何的这个，比如说财产还有就是知识这些都没有。我们从零开始学习，然后就是工作，然后积累了很多很多的这个经验学了很多的知识，然后就累积了很多的财富但是我们离开这个世界的时候呢，还是要回到零就是要完全归零从零就走到下一步下一生。
We can say that every time we are reborn in the human realm, or indeed any time we are reborn, regardless of which of the 6 realms we are reborn in, that when we are born, we start off at 0. So this is a point where we have no wealth, we have no knowledge, and so we work up from this point of 0. We work, we study, we accumulate knowledge, and gradually accumulate a lot of experience and wealth and so forth. However, when we leave this life, then we return back to 0. So this is the process of beginning at 0 and then returning to 0.
我们每一次就是离开这个世界就是走向下意识的时候呢，然后我们就发现我们没有任何的属于自己的东西没有任何属于自己的东西，全部所有的我们学到的知识，然后我们就奋斗了一辈子累积的这些财富，全部都要归零，没有任何东西是属于自己的。
And when we are leaving this world and poised to move into the next life, we discover that in actual fact we have nothing that belongs to us. All the knowledge that we've accumulated, all the wealth that we have earned at the time of our death, this all returns to 0.
所以我们在这个轮回当中就这么流转了几百万年、几千万年，甚至是更长的时间但是每一次都是这样子，从零开始又归零，又从零开始最后又归零这样子以后呢，我们没有任何的进步就是没有任何，永远都是一个凡夫，永远都是一个普普通通的众生没有任何的进步，没有任何的这个收获。
And so by cycling in samsara like this for millions and billions of years, or perhaps even longer, each time we are reborn, beginning with zero and then returning to zero. In this way, we do not see any progress whatsoever. Each time we are reborn, we are in the form of an ordinary mortal being. So there is no progress in our state, and nor do we receive any benefit.
然后不仅仅是要归零，而且我们从零开始学习，从零开始积累这些财富，这样子的时候呢，就为了这些东西我们付出了很多，面临了很多的压力，很多的困难很多的痛苦。
And it's not just that we return to zero at the time of our death, but when we start from zero at the beginning of each life, in order to accumulate wealth and in order to accumulate knowledge, we have to endure a great deal of hardship and struggle and difficulty.
那假设没有下一世没有下一辈子那也就算了但是如果真的有下一世有这个生命轮回，那这样子的话，我们每一次这样子反复的归零又归零这样子的这个人生这样子的这个生命到底有什么样的价值，有什么样的意义这个我们作为一个人类应该深入的去思考。
Let's suppose that there was no future life, or there were no future lives. In this case, we could forget about it. However, if it is the case that cyclic existence does exist and reincarnation and future lives do exist, then being reborn, moving from zero and returning to zero, zero to zero, time and time again, over and over, whether this kind of life pattern, whether it has any value or what its meaning is, this is a question that all of us should give deep thought to.
那么我们的生活当中就是面临的这个痛苦当中大多数的痛苦，绝大多数的痛苦，尤其是我们的精神上的这些痛苦，我们深入的去观察它的来源真正的来源是什么，这样子的时候呢，我们会发现它的源头它的这个来源实际上就是我们就是只考虑自己就不考虑别人的感受就是我执用佛教的话讲我执，或者是爱我执意思就是说我们本身就是我们对我有执着，然后在这个上面呢，我们有爱自己有不爱自己当然是没有太大问题了，主要是只爱自己不爱别人主要的这个原因每一次要归零还有就是在这个过程当中面对那么多的痛苦的主要的原因我们一定会发现就是这个问题。
If we look at it carefully, then we can recognize that the majority of suffering that we experience in our life, and especially the majority of psychological suffering, comes from one cause or origin, and that is our tendency to only think of ourselves and not of others. So this is what we refer to in Buddhism as self-clinging or self-cherishing. So ordinarily we have an attachment to ourself, and upon this foundation we then cherish ourselves. Of course, cherishing or loving oneself is not a problem. The issue is also not caring or not cherishing others. So the fact that each time we are reborn, we start at zero, we return to zero, and we face so much suffering, the main cause or reason for this is caring about ourselves and not others.
然后所有的幸福所有的快乐就是来自于我们爱别人慈悲别人关爱关心或者帮助别人所有的这个幸福和快乐的源头实际上就是这个。
And in terms of happiness, all of the happiness, the cause or the origin of all happiness is love, care, loving, caring, helping, and having concern for others.
我们现在有一句比较流行的一句话，就是爱就是被爱的开始实际上这个是对的。大乘佛教就这么讲，大乘佛教就说，如果我们懂得爱所有的众生那么所有众生也会爱我们如果我们关心所有的众生，那么其他众生也会直接的或者是间接的会关心我们那么在这个当中，我们就感觉得到幸福、快乐、温暖这样子。
These days, there's a rather popular saying to love others is the beginning of being loved oneself. And indeed, this is true. This saying is correct. The Mahayana teachings hold that if we understand how to love and have care for other beings, then they will either directly or indirectly have love and concern for us. And this is a source of great happiness and warmth.
这个慈悲心的重要性，我们今天就不讲太多我们今天要讲的是那个它的具体的修法。
So today we're not going to talk too much about the importance of compassion because our focus tonight is actually the method of compassion meditation.
实际上我们所有的众生就是人或者其他的这个生命凡是有情感的所有的这个生命都有慈悲心都是有慈悲心，只不过这个慈悲心是有非常非常的局限性是有非常的局限性，而且有些时候呢，这个慈悲心呢，在我们的内心的很深的地方就藏在很深的地方，很多时候就它不能发挥作用。但是每一个生命，每一个这个有情众生都有慈悲心的种子。
All beings, human beings and other kinds of beings, so long as they are sentient, they have sentience, have compassion in their minds. It's just that this compassion is rather limited in its nature. In some beings, compassion is tucked away very deeply in the mind, and so therefore it doesn't manifest itself. Nevertheless, all beings have the seed of compassion in their minds.
我们要学会我们要去学会去享受这个世俗这个实践当中的一个非常高端非常高级别的这样子的幸福和快乐。
What we need to learn how to do is how to enjoy an extremely high quality or high level of happiness in this worldly life.
这个幸福快乐是什么呢？就是慈悲心或者是我们无条件的这个奉献无条件的慈悲某一个众生或者是所有众生，这种感觉这个慈悲心给我们带来的这种成就感还有就是这种幸福感，就是其中一个。
And among high quality or high level happiness, that which comes from having compassion, unconditional compassion for another being or all beings, and the sense of achievement and happiness that comes from this is a very high level of happiness.
我们平时去看就是有些修行人有些比如说他的这个条件生活的条件不怎么好，然后他的环境也就比较恶劣这样子的时候呢，我们就很多人觉得他的生活非常的无聊非常的乏味甚至是非常痛苦我们就是以这样子的眼光看别人。
Some practitioners, some Dharma practitioners whose living standards are not so good or rather poor, and their living environments are rather basic, Sometimes people think that practitioners who live like this have lives that really lack meaning and indeed seem to be full of suffering.
那他们的生活的水平生活水平不是很高，我们看得到。但是呢，他们的生活的品质真的是非常非常的高他们所享受到的这些感受，我们有可能一辈子永远都享受不到这种快乐。
Even though the material standard of such practitioners' lives may not be particularly high, nevertheless the quality of their lives is extremely high. And in fact, it's possible that the feeling, the experience that they have in their lives is one that none of us will ever experience ourselves in an entire lifetime.
有可能他们享受到的这种幸福，有可能我们这一辈子从来到现在为止就活了这么长时间，从来都没有感受过。
It's entirely possible that the happiness, the kind of happiness that such practitioners enjoy in their lives, is a kind that all of us, up until the present day, having lived for as long as we have not yet ever experienced.
当我们拥有这样子的这个慈悲心的时候突然间就像天亮了一样这个就是从心底从这个内心深处，就是深深的体会到对自己的生命的这个满足感觉得自己的生命特别特别的有意义，然后这个满足感带来的这个快乐幸福，就平时我们在物质生活当中所获得的这些幸福和快乐，完全是没有办法比。
Once one gives rise to compassion in one's mind, then it's just like the break of dawn. When one gives rise to compassion from the bottom of one's heart, the satisfaction or the feeling of fulfillment that comes with this makes one's life feel extremely meaningful and confers a very strong feeling of happiness. And this feeling of happiness that we gain or give rise to in this situation is cannot be, or rather that the happiness that we usually derive from material things can in no way rival the happiness that comes from giving rise to compassion.
好，那么现在我们讲这个具体的训练的方式。我们刚才讲，我们每一个人的心底是有这样子的这个慈悲心但是呢，如果我们不去培养的话，那它永远都是一个种子而已不能发挥作用。如果我们去培养用这个大乘佛教的方法去培养的话，那我们心里的这个慈悲心呢它越来越增长，越来越强大。
So now we are going to move on to talking about the actual method for practicing or cultivating compassion. So as we just mentioned before, compassion is something that every being has in their mind. However, if we don't nurture this compassion or cultivate it, then it will only be a seed and therefore won't be able to really manifest its potential. So that's why it's important that we use the methods of the Mahayana teachings to cultivate compassion in our minds and increase our compassion and make it extremely strong.
如果比如说一粒米如果他永远都没有遇到过这个非我的土壤温度湿度这样子的话，那它永远都是一个种子，它永远都不会发芽。
If we take the example of a grain of rice or a grain, if this grain never encounters the conditions of fertile soil, warmth and moisture, then it will never be anything other than this grain. It will never grow into anything else.
如果我们把这一粒米就是播向一个非我的土壤里面那么它就很快就会发芽。
However, if we were to plant this grain of rice in fertile soil, then very quickly it would begin to sprout.
那我们的这个慈悲心的种子，如果不去培养那它永远都是一个这个慈悲心的种子而已永远都它不会增长。
And it's the same with the seed of compassion in our minds. If we never go about cultivating or nurturing this seed, then it will always remain just as a seed.
如果用大乘佛教的方法去培养这样子的话呢，这个慈悲心的种子它很快就会发芽，然后呢就成长，最后就变成了菩提心，很强大的慈悲心。
However, if we use the methods of the Mahayana teachings to grow our compassion, then it will quickly sprout and grow and eventually evolve into bodhicitta, so an extremely powerful and strong compassion.
然后我们有了这个慈悲心的话，当我们离开这个世界的时候呢，虽然这些世俗的名利这些东西都归零了但是呢，这些东西归零了以后，还有一些东西是属于自己的还没有归零这个我们可以带到下一世。
And if we are able to cultivate compassion like this, then when we find ourselves ready to leave this life, even though our worldly attainments like wealth and fame and so on, even though these things will return to zero, there will be some things that still belong to us. That is, a few things that we can take with us into the next life.
这个就是我们的，比如说今天讲的慈悲心就是其中一个不归零的，或者是属于自己的，或者是能够带走的这些东西当中一部分有一个就是这个慈悲心。
And one of these things that doesn't return to zero or nothing, or that belongs to ourselves, or that we can take with us to the next life is compassion.
好，这一章就是我们讲这个为什么要修慈悲心的原因了。然后呢，第二然后简单的说一下什么是慈悲心。
So that is the reason why we need to cultivate compassion, and I'm just going to talk briefly now about what compassion is.
然后我们先了解一下这个世俗我们平时讲的这个爱，还有跟这个还有就是大乘佛教讲的四无量心当中的慈悲心然后呢最后的这个菩提心这三个爱、慈悲心、菩提心，这三个我们很多人是分不清楚的。我们很多人认为这就是一回事，但不是这三个是三个不同的层次，三个不同的级别。
So in order to do this, we are going to look at three different concepts, interrelated concepts. First, the worldly notion of love, compassion within the context of the four immeasurables, and then bodhicitta. So these three things, most people can't differentiate between. They think, in fact, they're the same thing. However, love, compassion, and bodhicitta are, in fact, three different levels.
世俗的爱就是很有局限性的小范围的也叫做爱，比如说我们爱家人、爱朋友或者是有一些需要特殊的这个关心的这样子的人对他们的这种关心也叫做爱这些都叫做爱。
Worldly love is limited in scope. That it is love that is directed to a limited number of objects. So, for example, our family, our friends, or other people, special people that we care about. This is worldly love.
平时我们就是看到有人受苦遇到困难的时候，我们心里就产生了同情然后就希望他 离开这个痛苦，就是这样子，哪怕是1个人、10个人这么小范围的也叫做爱。这也就是我们用世俗的角度来讲，是标准的爱。
And if, say, we encounter people, we witness people who are encountering suffering or hardship, we typically give rise to sympathy for them in our own mind and wish them, whether this is in the case of 1 person or 10 people, this response is also an example of worldly love.
但是这个从大乘佛教的四无量心的角度来讲，那这个是不是慈悲心呢？还不够标准还不是慈悲心。为什么呢？大乘佛教的这个慈悲心是对所有众生对所有众生一切众生的这个关心一切众生的这种关爱。才叫做四无量心，小范围的这个还虽然是这个慈悲，但是呢还不是这个四无量心当中的这个慈悲心，这个层次不一样所以这个可以这样子理解大乘佛教讲的这个慈悲心呢，比我们的世俗大家讲的这个比这个爱还要高一个级别。
However, this level of love, or this kind of love, doesn't measure up or doesn't correlate to compassion within the context of the Mahayana teachings on the 4 immeasurables. The reason for this is that compassion, the immeasurable of compassion, refers to care and concern and love for all beings, not just a small number of beings. So even though the first kind of love we spoke about does entail compassion, it doesn't equate to compassion, the immeasurable of compassion. So we can say that the levels of compassion here are different. The Mahayana, the immeasurable of compassion, is 1 level up from worldly or conventional love.
然后菩提心呢比这个普通的慈悲心还要高一个级别。那为什么这么讲呢？菩提心就是说不是不仅仅是一个关心关爱而且就是我为了让所有众生离苦得乐我一定要成佛成了佛以后呢，我能够让一切众生离苦得乐所以我一定要成佛，这种决心才叫做菩提心。那么这个决心呢前面的这2个是没有这样子的决心所以它是就是这个跟前面有点不一样。
And then the 3rd level, bodhicitta, is 1 level up again from compassion. And the reason for this is that bodhicitta doesn't just entail care and concern for other beings. It doesn't just entail the desire that they be free from suffering and enjoy happiness, but it also entails the vow or the commitment to achieve Buddhahood, to make this possible. So it's this vow or this commitment to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings that is the distinct feature of bodhicitta.
好，这个是这3个的不同的区别这个我们今天就不展开讲了。那现在我们就讲这个具体的修法。
So that's the difference between these 3 levels of love or compassion. We're not going to go into them in any further detail tonight. Now we're going to go on and to talk about actually practicing compassion meditation.
首先比如说慈悲心或者是这种同情心或者关心关爱这些，比如说某一个人他自己经历了就是对方的这种痛苦，类似的这个痛苦经历过这样子的痛苦的话，那么当他看到别人也在经历这样子的痛苦的时候，然后对他的这种同情心是比较容易的关心关爱也就比较容易产生。
In terms of compassion, empathy, care, and concern, if a person witnesses another person who is undergoing a particular kind of suffering, if the person who witnesses has previously undergone this form of suffering themselves, then it's relatively more easy for them to give rise to feelings of sympathy, care, concern, and so on.
但是如果自己没有经历过这样子的痛苦的话，那么我们现在就是要去思考要去思考，或者是深入的去了解这样子的痛苦经历这样子的痛苦的话，这种感受这种感觉是什么样子，要去思考通过这种思考来对对方产生这个同情或者是这个慈悲心。
However, if we don't have personal experience of a particular kind of suffering, then it's necessary for us to use our imagination and really think about and contemplate what it would be like to undergo this kind of suffering, and to use this means or this method to give rise to feelings of empathy or compassion.
慈和悲这两个我们平时放在一起就叫做慈悲心。但是呢，慈和悲用佛教的角度讲的话，这个内容有一点点不一样悲是什么呢？当我们看到某一个人或者一个动物就是经历一个很强大的这个痛苦的时候这个时候我们就是发自内心的从心底深处就是希望这人或者这个动物远离这个痛苦就是希望他立即就没有这个痛苦这种心这种心缘就叫做悲心那么这个范围很大全世界全人类全生命的这样子的这个心愿叫做大悲心大悲心这个大悲心就是因为范围很大，所以叫大悲心。还有就是强度发自内心的特别的希望这个人或者这些人立即就离开这个痛苦这种心愿叫做悲心。
So when we talk about compassion, actually in Buddhism, this concept is actually made up of two words or two compounds: loving kindness and compassion. And both of these are understood in a slightly different way. Compassion is when we witness a human or an animal, for example, in experiencing suffering and give rise to a feeling from the very bottom of our heart that this being be immediately free from suffering. And this wish, this desire that this being be free from suffering is compassion. And when this is a wish that has a very great scope, that is, it relates to all beings in the world, all humans, all forms of life, then we refer to it as great compassion. So great compassion, the word great is because of the scope of the wish, and also because of the very strong intensity of the wish too.
好，慈悲心的慈意思就是说我们看到任何人任何一条生命的时候就是发自内心的希望他拥有幸福快乐就是从内心深处就希望这些人拥有幸福拥有快乐这样子的心愿叫做慈这叫做慈心。
Loving kindness, on the other hand, refers to the really deep wish or hope when we see any being or think about any being that they enjoy happiness and joy. And this wish from the very depths of our heart that other beings enjoy happiness and joy is what we mean by loving kindness.
现在我们在这个大乘佛教里面呢，有很多不同的这个方法来培养这个慈悲心其中我们给大家介绍一个方法，让我们大家体验一下。
So in the Mahayana teachings, there are a great variety of methods for cultivating and nurturing compassion. Tonight we are going to introduce one and lead everybody in this practice.
这个我们就是这个慈悲心的前提的条件，就是我们要充分的了解对方的痛苦如果我们不了解他有什么样的痛苦，那我们就不会有这个慈悲心。
So the precondition for practicing compassion is that we understand, we have a good understanding of the suffering of others. If we lack this understanding, then it will be difficult for us to give rise to compassion.
比如说我们到这个附近的时代广场去看看这个大街上有这么多无数的人走来走去，那从表面上看起来每个人都是很健康的很正常的，看不出谁有什么痛苦。但是呢如果我们深入的去了解的话，那么这每一个人的这个身体或者是每一个人的精神每一个人的这个背后呢有很多很多的故事，然后这些故事当中呢有很多很多的这个痛苦不开心的还有就是明天很多很多人也要面对很多的不行的事情，不开心的事情这样子每一个人一定是这样子的。如果我们不了解的时候呢就是大家都很健康，就是没什么。但是深入的，如果我们有机会就把某一个人他的这些经历或者是他的将来的这些事情深入的去了解一下的话，那么我们就发现这个不是我们从表面上看到的一样，每一个人的背后都有很多很多很多的这个不开心的事情甚至是很多的痛苦。
If we were to take ourselves to Times Square, we would see countless people walking back and forth. On the surface, it would appear that all of these people are healthy, normal. We wouldn't be able to tell who is experiencing suffering or not. However, if we were able to look more deeply and see beneath the surface, then we would recognize that each person, every single person, has many stories, stories that entail suffering, and they've experienced many unhappy episodes. Similarly, in the future, all of these people are likely to encounter unfortunate or unhappy things or suffering. Without understanding this or without looking or thinking more deeply, then we wouldn't know this to be the case. It would seem on the surface that they're all very normal and healthy. However, each of these people, no doubt, has experienced much suffering in the past and will experience much suffering in the future.
然后动物也是一样比如说我们很多时候就是为了人类的这个食物就是为了吃这些动物那么比如说养殖场里面的这些动物或者是这个屠宰场里面的动物，还有就是一些很多餐桌上的这些活的这些动物，那么它们呢每一条生命都有很多很多的痛苦但是呢我们平时根本就没有去想他们有多大的这个痛苦，这样子以后呢很多人对他们也没有什么这个同情没有什么关心或者慈悲主要的原因也就是没有去了解，没有去深入的了解，就是这个原因如果我们了解的话，因为人不管是有信仰没有信仰，但是只要是一个人他的心底是有这个慈悲心的种子，这个我们刚才已经讲过了。所以如果现在他了解了这些人或者是这些生命的痛苦再加上他稍微花一点点的时间去思考一下，这样子以后呢一下子他的这个慈悲心的种子就点燃了一定会是这样子。
And it's the same with animals too, whether it be animals in slaughterhouses or the animals that wind up on our dinner tables. Every single animal life, in fact, undergoes a great deal of suffering, but this is not something that we as humans typically give much thought to. The reason, and so most people then therefore have very little suffering or compassion for these animals that end up on our dinner table. The reason why that people lack empathy and compassion is because they don't make any deep or sincere attempt to really understand and empathize the suffering of these animals. But as we've said, any person, whether they are religious or not, do have a seed of compassion in their minds. And if they make an effort to try to understand the suffering of others and then spend a little time really contemplating this suffering, then this seed of compassion that is in their mind will surely ignite.
我们的最大的问题就是不去思考别人的其他生命的这种痛苦，我们不愿意去了解其他生命的这些痛苦。平时我们有些东西是如果去思考一下，对我们自己是非常有利的但是呢，我们把一些很多非常重要的事情都忽略了，甚至有些人是一辈子都没有去想过这些事情活得非常非常的茫然有些事情如果去稍微思考一下，对我们的帮助是很大的但是我们从来都没有这么去想所以呢，我们最后也就没有这个慈悲心，主要就是因为我们没有去思考，这是最大问题。
The greatest problem of ours is that we don't think about, we don't give these things enough thought. We are not willing to think about the sufferings of other beings. So even though there are some things that if we thought about would bring us much benefit, some people neglect to give these things thought for their entire lifetimes. That is, they live in a really blind kind of way. The benefit of contemplating or thinking about these things would be great, but they never do it. And so this is the main reason why we lack compassion, simply because we do not give the suffering of other beings thought.
如果有一个非常有钱的人，他如果愿意花一点点的时间去思考一下，去感受一下这些贫穷的人的痛苦这样子的话，那他一定会愿意帮助这些人。
If an extremely rich person were willing to spend a little bit of time to really think about and contemplate the sufferings of poor people, then they would certainly be willing to assist them.
那我们平时我们自己身体健康的时候呢，我们就忘掉了生病的痛苦，病人的痛苦，病人的感受是什么样子。
And when we are in good health, typically we forget about the suffering of being sick, of being ill, and so we forget about the suffering of ill people.
当我们自己进入医院的时候生病进入医院的时候，那个时候我们才发现原来生病就有那么大的痛苦那个时候知道了其实也是没有太大的用。
It's only when we enter hospital ourselves that we discover or realize the suffering of being sick, but realizing at this late stage is really not of much use.
我们前几天也讲过，学佛就是简单的说，学佛就是佛让我们有不同的角度去思考，不同的角度去看问题，不同的角度去看这个世界让我们有多一点的这个角度去看，不要老是有一个很死板的就是这个习惯性的一个很传统的这样子的这个角度，只有一个角度，一个非常死板的角度去思考不要这样子多一点的选择，多一点的角度去思考。实际上学佛我们简单的说的话，学佛就是用不同的这个角度去思考问题，这个就叫做学佛。
As we said a few days ago, really studying Buddhism, the essence of studying Buddhism is adopting different perspectives to think about things, different perspectives or angles to approach problems, different perspectives of looking at the world. So that is, we should really go beyond just thinking about things from one perspective, a rigid perspective that we're accustomed to, a traditional perspective. So studying Buddhism really is learning to approach things from multiple perspectives.
好，现在我们的这个具体的方法呢，我们刚才讲了，首先是要了解。那了解我们怎么了解呢？了解就是我们现在自己没有经历这个痛苦。当我们是健康的人的时候，我们的生活当中没有发生什么这个很明显的痛苦这样子的时候呢，我们去通过我们的思维去感受通过我们的思维去感受了解这个众生的这个对方的痛苦通过这个方法让我们对他们产生同情关爱然后就是慈悲。
So to return to the actual method of cultivating compassion, as we just said, in order to understand the sufferings of others when we have no personal experience of this suffering ourselves, say, for example, when we are still healthy and haven't experienced the suffering, serious suffering of being ill, then we need to use the power of our thought to really think about and contemplate the sufferings of others and thereby give rise to empathy, care, and compassion.
好，现在我们的具体的方法是什么？我们在这个之前所看到的、所听到的这些当中我们自己认为最痛苦的最残忍的最悲惨的是什么这个我们去想一想可能是我们每一个人都之前所看到的所听到的当中。 肯定会有比如说像历史上的战争这个饥荒瘟疫还有这个自然灾害等等，在这些当中一些这个人或者其他的生命面对了什么样的这个痛苦，这些当中呢，自己认为这是最大的痛苦，最大的这个最大的这个痛苦，这种我想可能是每个人都有的。那么有的话首先我们把这个画面要想出来。
So in terms of actually doing this in practice, what I'd like everyone to do is to recall everything that you've seen or heard or experienced and bring to mind the instance of greatest suffering or greatest tragedy or cruelty that you are aware of. I'm sure that everyone can bring to mind a particular instance. It might be a war that has taken place in history or famine, an epidemic, natural disasters. In any case, bring to mind an instance of great extreme suffering encountered by whether it be humans or other beings, and bring this image to your mind.
大家想想自己有没有我们所听到的、所看到的当中有没有这样子的让大家想一想然后呢，我们等一下要去这个修这个慈悲心的时候呢。 我们要把这个过去听到的或者看到的自己认为是最痛苦的这个画面要在我们的这个脑海当中要出现要去想要去思考这个。
So everybody please give some thought to this, whether or not you can think about, bring to mind such an incident, whether it be one that you have heard about or one that you've seen for yourself. And when we actually go about cultivating meditation, we need to bring this incident to mind and think about it, contemplate it carefully.
平时我们就是比如说宰杀动物还有就是比如说像战争等等的这些纪录片真实的这些画面 还有比如说自然灾害、车祸等等啊，这些都是我们这些很血性的东西呢，我们平时都是不敢看的，很多人都很害怕，不敢看。其实这些如果能够面对的话就是鼓起勇气去看一看，了解一下真实的情况，然后到时候呢，我们去想这个事情就是这个完全可以作为一个让我们修出慈悲心的一个非常有用的一个这个修行的资料这是非常好的应该去多了解但是我们很多人的第一个反应就是我们看到这样子的时候，我立即就转身我们不敢看。其实是如果可以的话呢应该多看一眼了解一下。
Documentaries of animals being slaughtered and wars and so forth, or natural disasters and car accidents, bloody episodes such as these, are typically things that people don't really want to look at. They often feel scared. However, if we are able to confront such images, summons the courage to look at such images and bring ourselves to really understand and think about the suffering that is being experienced in these circumstances, then this can be really excellent content or the excellent basis for cultivating our compassion. Many people's first reaction upon seeing such things is to turn away, not being willing to look at such scenes. But if we can bring ourselves to do so, then it is an excellent source for enhancing our understanding and compassion.
有一个纪录片叫做《地球公民》那么这个纪录片我想可能也许我们有一部分人看过里面虽然这个里面没有讲到人类都是这些屠宰场或者是养殖场这些里面的这些动物的一些有些非常残忍的这些手段那这个看起来就是很多人是确实是不敢看的但是呢，如果我们想了解一下的话这个是对我们的修心修慈悲心是有一定的帮助。
There's a documentary called Earthlings. This documentary isn't about humans, it's about the cruelty of slaughterhouses and animal factories and so forth. Often people are not willing to watch such kinds of things. However, if we can, then it will be of certain help to cultivating compassion.
现在我们准备就这个修慈悲心大家要准备好刚才讲我们看到的听到的当中哪一个是自己认为是最残忍的最痛苦的然后有想好了没有找到了没有我们现代的人这个内心我们的心理是非常非常的脆弱非常的脆弱，我们特别的在乎，特别的追求这个心里的一点点的这个稍微快乐一点的感受稍微有一点点比较恐惧的，或者是让我们产生有点不开心的这样子的事情，全部拒绝，全部回避这样子但是这是不对的这是不对的。我们虽然有些时候就是去想这些画面的时候呢，有一点点不开心但是这个不开心的背后呢我们一定会得到一个更重要的这个力量更重要的力量。所以比如说像生病一样生病，我们的肉体生病的时候，我们也不愿意，大家都不愿意我们把病就是当做一个非常非常的严重的这个问题来看。但是如果我们如果能够有一种方法去面对这个疾病，这样子的话，实际上 病痛也不一定完全是一个坏事，有可能通过这个病痛我们在这个人生当中就学到很多的智慧学到很多一辈子有用的有理的这样子的这个东西，我们有可能通过这个病得到这样子，这个都有可能的。但是因为不开心或者是这个疼痛的这个感受是比较大家都不太欢迎的这样的感受，所以我们拒绝但是有些时候不拒绝接受的话，对我们的收获会更大。
So everybody, we're going to begin now with our compassion practice. So please bring to mind that instance that you have either seen yourselves or heard about of greatest cruelty and suffering. Most people these days, our minds are very weak. We chase after even the smallest kind of happiness we chase after, and we resist even the very smallest and slightest form of unhappiness or things that cause us to feel fear. However, even though certain experiences, such as, for example, bringing to mind instances of suffering, might make us feel somewhat unhappy in the moment, behind this feeling, we can derive or we can gain a more important power. So we can liken it to when we are sick. The experience of physical sickness is something that no one is willing to experience. Everyone regards being ill as a serious problem. However, if we have a method to approach this sickness, then we can discover that in actual fact there's a great deal of wisdom that we can gain from the experience of being sick that will be of benefit and use to us for a lifetime. This is entirely possible, and so too it is with unhappiness and suffering. If we can, instead of resisting and refusing the feeling, the unpleasant feeling that goes with this, and rather accept it, then we will discover that there is something of greater benefit and use for us.
好，我们现在这个具体的方法就有3个步骤。
So in terms of the compassion practice that we're going to do now, there are 3 steps.
好，第一个步骤呢，我们要花5分钟的时间去冥想去观想。
So the first step, we're going to spend about 5 minutes visualizing or bringing to mind a particular image.
去冥想去观想什么呢？我们刚才已经之前就给大家讲过了。我们现在应该是大家有所准备我们所看到的、所听到的这些事情曾经发生过的这些事情当中，我们认为是最严重的痛苦这个画面我们想想就出现在我们的眼前先把这个人也好。动物也好就是人受这样子的非常悲惨的这个痛苦那这个我们在脑海里面再重新在这个显现出来这个就叫做冥想，也就是我们曾经看到的这些东西呢，深入的去想一想曾经有什么样的人，有什么样的这个动物面临了什么样的这个痛苦，这是真人真实的不是我们就无中生有的想，这是我们以前听过看过的这个现在我们去想当时的这个情况，回忆简单的说就是回忆一下，这个是第一个步骤。
So in terms of what we visualize, this is what we have just been speaking about. That particular instance that we've either seen or heard ourselves of greatest suffering. So we bring this to mind, we bring this to our mind's eye, whether it be human suffering or animal suffering, and we deeply think about this. So this first stage of visualization is essentially one of recollecting this form of past suffering and thinking about it deeply.
好，现在我们打坐的时候，这个身体的姿势，我们前几天讲过了，还有我们这个网上的这个视频里面呢，有很多这方面的这个讲解到时候可以一步一步的学但是我想这个大家应该知道，我们现在大家坐在这个椅子上就是腿就没办法盘，但是没关系的，然后呢手就是这样子禅定，然后就是放在这个肚脐下面，然后身体端正然后呢头稍微往前头低头。这样子然后呢，我们开始去回忆过去的这个画面大家做这个姿势身体的姿势。
So to begin with, everyone please adopt the proper bodily postures for meditating. We talked about these yesterday. There's also a lot of teachings online that you can watch for yourselves, but I think that probably everybody understands this. So everyone please be seated. It's not possible to cross your legs, but bring your hands together in the meditation mudra and put your hands beneath your navel. Sit upright with your head slightly forward, and please bring to mind this particular image of suffering.
好，我们现在开始用5分钟的时间，我们去回忆刚才我们讲的这个内容。
So we're going to begin now, and for 5 minutes we're going to recollect this form of past suffering.
好，我们现在开始。
We're going to begin now.
们用了5分钟的时间。
So that's about 5 minutes.
好，现在是第2个步骤我们刚才把这个画面就是把这个画面调过来我们就是出现，让它再一次的出现了我们的眼前这样子了。那么现在到这个时候呢，我们就有一个问题呢，就是我们当做一个旁观者来看比如说我们想看电影一样的去看，就是看这个画面这样子的话，这个影响不是很深刻。
So now we're going to move on to the second step. Now in the first stage, when we brought this particular image of suffering to mind, we were sort of adopting the perspective of an observer, like an observer of a film, and so therefore the impact on us was not completely great.
我们去想回忆或者是冥想的时候呢，会有一些感受但是不是很深刻因为我们自己没有参与在里面自己没有参与到里面，就是从旁边看电影看戏剧这样去看的话，那就是因为我们没有参与到里面，所以这个感受不是很深。所以我们现在第2个步骤我们要把自己参与到里面。
So when we recollect suffering or we visualize suffering in this way, the reason that the impact that it produces is not so deep is because we are not participating personally in the suffering. We're only adopting the perspective of an observer, as if we were watching a film or a play. So the second step of this meditation involves us actually bringing ourselves into a participatory role in this suffering.
我们刚才讲过，学佛就是让我们学会不同的角度去思考问题。好，现在我们就是要用不同的角度去思考这个问题。
So as we said before, studying Buddhism is learning how to think about problems from different perspectives. So in this step of the meditation practice, we are going to adopt a different perspective to think about this particular suffering.
现在我们什么样的不同的角度呢？现在我们刚才大家所想象的这个画面当中的这个这个主要的人物或者动物现在我们把这个就当作自己这个角色就当作自己去扮演这个角色，也就是说把自己冥想或者观想为这个人或者动物如果我是他我有一个这样子的经历我现在正在面对这样子的这个痛苦感受的话那我会什么样子就是把自己这样子参与进去。
So in order to do this, what we need to do is put ourselves in the position of the person or the being undergoing the suffering. So we need to visualize ourselves in their position and contemplate what it would be like, how we would feel if we were undergoing that suffering right now ourselves.
好，这个我们现在用5分钟的时间刚才我们观想的自己认为是最残忍最痛苦的这个里面的这个主角现在把自己当作这个主角，然后呢我们去思考一下这个感受会是什么样子这是一个。另外一个呢也可以如果这个人或者动物是我的母亲那么我眼睁睁的看到我的母亲就是经历了这样的痛苦的话，那我会什么样的感受会什么样的我母亲或者父亲或者自己的儿女 也许这个可能是这个反应最强烈如果这个角色换成自己的儿女这样子的话，也许这个反应就会更加的强烈这样子。然后呢，我们把参与进去以后呢，才会有这个比较不一样的这个反应。
So we're going to spend 5 minutes now bringing to mind again this form of suffering that we have been contemplating on, and put ourselves in the position of the being experience suffering, and contemplate what this experience of suffering feels like. So another approach we can take is to whether it be the human or the animal that was suffering, we can, rather than putting ourselves in that position, we can reflect on how we would feel, what our feeling would be if it was our own mother, if it were our own mother in that position, if we were witnessing our own mother experiencing this form of suffering. Or otherwise, we can visualize our father or our son or our daughter in this position. It's possible that by taking this approach that the experience or the feeling that we gain is stronger.
好，这个就是我们的一个比较重要的一个修慈悲心或者训练的方法。
So this participatory approach is an important step of our compassion cultivation.
好，这个我们也用5分钟的时间。
And we're going to do this for 5 minutes.
好，大家身体的姿势我们就是像刚才那样子，身体的姿势恢复。
So we're going to put ourselves back in the posture for meditation.
好，然后我们开始思考5分钟。
And contemplate this for 5 minutes.
好，我们用了5分钟。
So that's 5 minutes.
好，现在是第3个步骤。
Now it's the 3rd step.
现在第3个步骤呢，我们刚才把这个画面当中的这个主角我们把它当作我自己那这个时候呢，我们的感受就不一样也许我们今天也大家一起打坐的时候，因为有些人呢可能是第一次这么去思考，也许没有很明显的效果，但是没有关系我们可以反复的去训练一定会有很明显的这个效果。
So in the 2nd step, we visualized ourselves in the positionality of the being experiencing suffering, and so the feeling, the experience that we gained was different from the 1st step. It's possible that for some people here, it's the first time that they've adopted this perspective. They've done this before, and it's possible then that that you might not have had a particularly strong response to this meditation. However, by repeating it over and over again, surely you'll definitely gain a strong response.
好，现在我们第3个步骤呢，我们要这样子去思考刚才我们把这个主角当作是自己，其实不是这是我们一个训练的方法而已，实际上不是这个人或者这个动物不是我也不是他但是我们虽然我不是他但是是一样的一样是什么意思呢比如说我现在就是不愿意面对任何的痛苦我就希望我自己离开所有的痛苦，任何一个痛苦我都拒绝那么我刚才就是我们第1个步骤当中我想象的这个画面当中的这个主角他也是一样，他也不愿意面对所有的痛苦，他也拒绝所有的这个痛苦他也不愿意面对任何一个痛苦。从这个角度，我跟他是一模一样的这是第1个。
So now in the 3rd stage, we come to seeing that when we meditated on ourselves in the position of the being who was suffering, in actual fact, it wasn't ourselves undergoing this suffering. It wasn't really the case. This was just a training exercise. The human or the animal that we recollected suffering during the 1st stage is not us, and we are not them. However, we are the same as this being in some respects. And in what respect is it that we are the same as them? Well, just as this being is not willing to encounter any kind of suffering, so too are we also not willing to encounter or undergo any form of suffering. So in this respect, we are the same. We are equal to this being.
然后第2就是比如说我本人就是在任何时候希望拥有自己希望拥有这个幸福快乐哪怕是很小的这个感受身体的感受这个内心的感受，我们都希望自己拥有特别的希望，特别的在乎自己的这些感受那么从这个角度讲刚才我们画面当中的这个主角他也是一样一模一样，从这个角度我跟他是一模一样，他也是跟我是一模一样，从这个角度没有任何的不一样。所以从这个角度佛教就讲生命平等，众生平等。众生平等的意思呢这并不是说所有的众生都是一模一样，当然不可能，当然不一样，连我们人类都不一样的。但是呢从这2个问题上看的话，所有的众生都是平等的，都是一模一样的。
And in just the same way that we wish to enjoy happiness, even the smallest form of happiness, whether it be physical or psychologically, we wish to enjoy, we care very much about. And from this perspective, we can say that we are also the same as the being who we visualized during the first step of this meditation. We are no different from this being from this perspective. And so it's because of these two aspects of similarity that we talk about in Buddhism, the equality of all beings. The equality of all beings doesn't mean that all beings are exactly the same in all respects. This is clearly not the case. Even among humans there are differences. However, in these two respects, the desire to be free from suffering and to enjoy happiness, all beings are equal, all beings are the same.
好，我们现在第三个步骤的这个具体的思维的方式是，首先我跟他就是我们刚才讲，从这两个方面是一模一样。那么既然这样子一模一样的话，那就我不应该只考虑我自己的感受这是没有道理的没有道理的那大家都这么这个拒绝痛苦这样子的话，那我为了我的感受，就是给别人带来痛苦，这个就更不合理了更不应该。那么他们所有的众生所有的生命都跟我一样非常非常的在乎自己的，哪怕是很小很小的这个快乐那这样子的话，我就不能毁掉不能去毁灭，不能去毁掉别人的其他众生的这个幸福快乐那么既然我们大家都一样那我现在就是希望天下所有中，刚才我们这个画面是我们的一个历史上曾经发生过的事情，我现在去想一想而已。实际上此时此刻也有无数的生命也就正在面临这样子的这个痛苦那我现在就是发自内心的希望这些众生远离这些所有的痛苦就像我自己希望没有痛苦一样，我现在就是希望这些所有的众生远离这些痛苦这个是我们的第三个，也就是最后一个思维的方式。
So the third step of this contemplation is to realize that since all beings are the same, since we ourselves are the same and no different to other beings, then we shouldn't just care about ourselves. If all beings don't wish to encounter suffering, then there is no justification to cause suffering to others for the sake of our own interests. And in just the same way as all beings care very much about their own happiness, there is no justification for ourselves ruining or destroying the happiness of others. And then we reflect on the fact that since all beings are the same, this form of suffering that we brought to mind during the first step, this is an example of suffering that took place in the past, but we recognize that actually all the time, every second, countless beings are undergoing various kinds of suffering just like this. And so during this third stage, what we do is give rise from the bottom of our hearts to the deep wish that all beings be free from suffering. And so this is the third and final stage or step of this meditation practice.
刚才的我们的前面的两个步骤，两个这个思维的方式，就是过程最后我们发自内心的希望所有众生远离一切痛苦那这个就是这个行缘，就是结果我们需要的就是这个结果。
So the first and second steps in this meditation are the process, the processual part of this meditation. When we reach this third step, where we give rise to the deep wish from the bottom of our hearts for all beings to be free from suffering, then this wish is the fruit or the result of the meditation, and this is the result that we're aiming for.
好，现在我们又开始这个身体的姿势就是要做禅定的姿势。
So we're going to resume our postures again, resume our meditation postures.
好，然后我们用5分钟的时间就是希望这些众生也跟我一样远离所有的这个痛苦发自内心的希望我们刚才所想象的这些众生远离所有的痛苦，就是5分钟当中这个思考这个问题。
So during the next 5 minutes, we're going to give rise to the strong wish that all beings, just like ourselves, like we wish for ourselves, be free from all suffering. So we're going to cultivate this wish for the next 5 minutes.
好，我们请大家全神贯注，我们现在开始。
So everyone, please bring your attention to a focus, and we're going to begin now.
好，我们5分钟了。
That's 5 minutes.
好，这个时候我们这个最后一个的这个思考的时候我们可以去想，那就是4个方面的。
So during this third step, we can contemplate from 4 points.
首先，第一个我们刚才去思考这个、去回忆这个画面的时候呢，第3个步骤当中发自内心的希望这个众生还有就是跟他一样的无数的众生，就是远离痛苦，远离所有的痛苦，这是希望先是希望所有众生远离痛苦，这是第一个。
So the first point is that we can give rise to a strong wish from the bottom of our heart that this particular being and countless other beings like it be free from suffering.
第二就是发愿愿一切众生不要有这样子的痛苦，愿一切众生离开所有的这个痛苦这样子发愿这叫做愿第一个是希望，第二个是发愿。愿跟希望有一点点不一样，希望就是我们心里希望它怎么样然后发愿呢，我们在这个希望的基础上然后就续了一个愿愿一切众生再也不要面对不要这样子的不要发生这样子的事情对，就是这样子的这个发愿叫做第二。
The second point is to make an aspiration that all beings be free from this suffering, that all beings never again encounter such suffering. So in the first case, the first point is a wish or a hope that all beings be free from this suffering. The second stage or the second aspect is an aspiration. So on the foundation of a wish, we make an actual aspiration that they not encounter this suffering.
第3个就是决定决定就是下决心，下什么决心呢就是说我今天下定决心，我一定要这个让所有的众生离开这样子的这个痛苦我就要去做这件事情这个并不是说我今天就让所有众生离开痛苦，这个不现实，不可能但是呢，我从现在开始就是要参与到这种这个当中就是我要去做这个让所有众生离开痛苦的这个事情，我要下定决心，我要去做这件事情这是第3。
The third point is resolve, and so this resolve is to decide from today onwards that I will work towards assisting all beings to be free from suffering. So of course it's not possible that we will achieve this in just one day. However, when we make this resolve, we make the firm decision to participate in work that enables all beings to be free from suffering. So the resolve, the decision, the undertaking to do this is the third point.
好，这个决定这个决定并不是说我们现在当下就让所有的众生离开痛苦这个是我们刚才讲的不现实。那意思就是说，只要有这个能力只要有这个机会，我一定要去做这件事情。还有就是我从现在开始给自己创造这样子的这个力量这样子的机会我要从现在就要开始去做我一定要做我光是希望没有用我光是发愿都是很好的，但是没有用必须要有实际的行动所以呢，我从现在下定决心，我要去做让一切众生离开痛苦的这样子的事情，我就要投入到这个当中这叫做决定这是第三。
So this third point, making the resolve, as we just said, of course it's unrealistic to immediately achieve this straight away. However, by working towards growing our capacity to do this and taking the opportunity to do so when it exists, we make the resolve that from now onwards we will increase our power to work for this goal, and we will go about creating the opportunity. So this entails us recognizing that having the wish and the aspiration for all beings to be free from suffering is of course good, but in itself is not enough, and that in addition to this, it's necessary that we actually undertake concrete action. So when we make the resolve to do this, to actually engage in concrete actions and vow to invest ourselves in these actions, then this is the third point, resolve.
好，然后呢，最后一个就是第四就是祈祷祈请佛菩萨给我力量给我力量。我现在虽然是发了一个这样子的心下定决心要去做这样子的事情，但是呢，实际上我是没有任何能力所以这个希望佛菩萨佛和菩萨给我力量给我能够这个让所有众生能够做出让所有众生幸福快乐能够消除所有众生的这个痛苦的这样子的力量给予我这样子祈祷，这个就是最后一个，这四个是非常非常重要的。
The fourth point is to pray, to make prayer, to pray to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to give us the power to manifest this, to bring about the elimination of suffering of all beings. So we realize that we've made an aspiration to achieve this, but that presently we lack sufficient capacity to actually realize it. So in this fourth stage, we make a prayer to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to give us the power to eliminate the suffering of all beings. These 4 points are all very important.
好，我们今天讲的这个就是一个简略的一个慈悲心的这个修法。虽然是简略但是呢，它是一个完整的慈悲心的修法。希望大家用得上我们每一天哪怕是20分钟这样子的时间或者是15分钟，我们刚才讲的每一个步骤就用个5分钟这样子的话，15分钟就完成了。那么这么一个短短的时间当中修一下慈悲心那么这样子的话，我们很快就会有慈悲心的。
So the method that I outlined tonight is a simplified or a brief, condensed method for cultivating compassion. Even though it is a condensed method, it's a complete method, and I hope that everyone can practice it, whether just for 10 or 20 minutes each day. In fact, each stage, if we spend 5 minutes on each stage, then we can complete the practice in 15 minutes. And by practicing in this way, not using much time, very quickly we will be able to grow compassion.
好，如果我们 有一天啊，有了真实无伪的慈悲心啊，这样子的话，我们先不说来世啊，这一现实啊的这个人生都一定会有非常大的变化。
So if one day we are able to cultivate genuine compassion, then let's not talk for the time being about our next life, but even in this life, we will see very great change.
好，今天的我们这个课啊，就讲到这里。
So that brings to a conclusion tonight's class.
好，我们现在最后大家一起回想。
And we're going to end now with a dedication together.
Sonam dayi tanja sabanya dole nibe janan paje Tigana jiwa mujaba Chiti dole doa doa sho Om Bhajangara Lama Sadam Om谢谢阿弥陀佛，扎西给你。
Thank you, everyone.